Hello, good evening everyone, and a very warm welcome to this, the first in our series of calf crop webinars. This series of webinars has been funded by the University Innovation Fund and is brought to you by the SEC Consulting Livestock team and also SRUC Vet Services. This is actually the third year of the calf crop series. Last year and the year before, we brought it to you in person. We toured around the country and had a more traditional delivery. However, if there was one positive that COVID has brought, it's probably the webinar and being able to stream these series of webinars directly to you in your own home. So hopefully you find today's webinar useful. Could I have the next slide, please? So what are we trying to achieve with Calf Crop 2021? So the goal is the same as what we've been trying to do before. We're trying to get key research messages, those really important key messages that are coming out from research centres across the country, and we're trying to get them out to farmers to where it really matters. We're trying to improve the overall performance of the Scottish suckler herd, the Scottish beef sector. Now we know there's issues there, and there's issues out with our control. There's global economics on the go that get in the way of suckler cow profitability and productivity. But we also know that there's plenty that we can do as individuals to our own businesses to improve our bottom line and also to improve our environmental credentials, which is something that's becoming increasingly more important. Basically, in short, what we're trying to do is produce more calves, get more live, healthy calves on the ground, and ultimately make more money. And the next one, Seamus, thanks. So before we kick off, I'd just like to introduce the team. So the delivery team for these series of webinars is going to be largely the same 4 people. So we've got 2 from SRUC Vet Services, which are Tim Geraghty and Alwyn Jones, and then 2 from the livestock team at SEC Consulting, which are Karen Stewart, who is a ruminant nutritionist, and myself, I'm a beef specialist. But behind every we'll introduce these speakers more fully later on, but behind every great team, and I hope this is a great team, I'm sure it is, there's a equally important backroom staff as well. So tonight we've got Seamus Murphy, who's on he's on comms and on technology, so he's pulling the strings in the background. And then we had Val Angus, who you've all, I think, had some experience with in booking on, and she certainly does all the admin and all the hard work to make this to bring this all together. And then my 2 colleagues, Sarah Ball and Leslie Wiley, are both beef consultants, and they've been really useful, really helpful in getting some of these messages pulled together. So thanks to them at this stage. And that's not any blame. If there's any blame, any issues, that falls entirely on my doorstep. So this year's format, as I say, is different. It's not a one-day meeting, and for me, I think that's, in some ways, it is progress. So we've tried to kind of reflect the fact that it's not all about one day. It's not all about just calving the cow. It's about the full production cycle. It's about all that goes on throughout the year. So we're really looking at the kind of key areas throughout the year, and obviously calving and management of that neonatal calf is hugely important to this ongoing success of any enterprise. But this year we've brought in some weaning, some management at weaning time as well for the autumn. So we've got a series of 5 meetings. You've seen this on the flyer as well. Series of 5 meetings. Today we're looking at setting up your herd, setting up the cow to get her fit for calving, or make sure she's fit for calving. And then on Thursday, we'll move on to calving systems. Next week, we look at bull fertility, bull management, and then on to calving assistance and also antibodies. So a lot about colostrum management and things there too. And then the spring series will finish with looking at neonatal respiratory disease and scours, which is often the scourge of your calving's been going fine until you hit the buffers or hit a brick wall when it comes to problems with live calves. So that's the kind of the next 5 meetings over the next couple of weeks. So that's what you've hopefully got to look forward to in this new format of delivery. So tonight's meeting, our 2 main speakers, Alwyn is in the background. Alwyn and I will be speaking on Thursday night, but Alwyn's in the background for some questions. But the main speakers are Karen Stewart, who's going to look at pre-calving nutrition and minerals, and Tim Geraghty, who's going to look or focus around disease, body condition, and a bit about pre-calving health planning, or the importance of health planning as well. So that's tonight's meeting. But on to the next slide. it's really important that this is actually, we've pulled together the content for the meeting, but this is your meeting, and it's really important that we get or you get all you need out it, because your situation is it's the most important thing for you anyway. That's why you're here. So make sure you do ask questions. Unfortunately, we're not in the same room, so we can't ask questions in the normal manner, but probably many of you will be accustomed to this. There's a questions panel on the right hand side. If you click on it, you can type in your question. Those questions only actually come to me. I'll chair the questions. No one else sees them. I'll chair them and field them to the panel, and maybe answer some myself. So that's how it goes. Please keep them coming. What we'll do, we'll hold the questions till the end. So we'll have Karen will go first, then we'll get Tim, and then we'll use the remainder of the session for questions, and hopefully we'll be done for around 9 o'clock is the plan. So without any further ado, I would just like to once again encourage you all to ask questions, and just pass over to Karen.
Okay. Can everybody see that now, Robert?
Yep, I can see it fine, thanks.
Okay. Okay, good evening everyone. Thanks very much, Robert, for the introduction. So we're talking about setting the cow up for calving, and I'm going to focus on how we can help her nutritionally. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slide. There we go. So the aim of this calf crop is to get more calves on the ground. So we want to have a cow that's fit for calving. We want to have a calf that's fit for suckling. So the cow needs to get on with the calving, get the calf out, and the calf got to be vigorous enough and get fit for suckling. But we also want her to get back in calf. So the three areas I'm going to look at and the role of nutrition in these areas is cow condition and the base ration, so the overall ration, and also a little bit about minerals. So it should be about 20 minutes altogether. So just talking a little bit about body condition, you'll all be very familiar with the body conditioning scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the thinnest and 5 being the fattest. And I just wanted to go over some sort of rules of thumb to practice with your own herds. I think it's really important throughout the whole year to try and keep the cows in a condition score between 2.5 and 3.5. So we want to avoid really thin cows and we want to avoid really fat cows. And Tim's going to talk a bit more about this and the consequences on calving and fertility in his talk. So you will all on your own farms look at your cattle and assess their body condition by eye, but I really would encourage you to pop a hand on the cows, and where I've marked circles on the animal in the picture is the areas that to focus on, so the transverse processes on the spine and also on the tail head. So we're aiming for about condition score 2.5 at calving time, and to be a condition score 2.5, these spinous processes need moderate pressure and they'll feel rounded. At 3.5, they can be felt, but with a lot more pressure. And if they can't be felt at all, you know that your cows are too fit and over conditioned. So in spring calvers, probably aim for about 3 at scanning time and then 2.5 at calving, and try and group the cows and feed it to condition earlier on. I mean, I appreciate it's getting closer to calving, but I wanted to just emphasise and remind you that body conditioning cows is an all year round job to think about. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slides. Oh, there we go. It also takes time for this body condition to come off as well, or to go on if you need to put weight on. With it being around 13% of live weight, that's about 85 kilos for a 650 kilo cow. So if you're doing this at a nice steady pace, not taking too much off or putting too much on at once, it would take around about 170 days for one body condition score unit change. I mean, obviously, if cows are very fat coming up to calving or very lean, we can put more weight on or take more weight off in a controlled way, but always seek advice to do this. If you need more information, Basil has done a fantastic, Basil Loman has done a fantastic 2-part condition scoring video on QMS YouTube, or there's also information at nadis.org.uk. Tim is going to have a wee look more in his talk about the consequences of body condition. And I was just going to touch on, if you have fat cows near to calving just now and to thin cows, you know, you can still do something about it. Obviously, we don't want to play about with condition too much near our calving, and you know, the more we could do earlier on, the better. But you know, if you are in that situation, fat cows can still lose a bit of weight coming up to calving time, as long as you meet their protein and mineral requirements. It's really vital you meet protein requirements, simply because the cow cannot get the energy out of her feed, and her rumen will not function properly without enough protein. So we really want to emphasise to avoid starvation diets for over-fat cows. And as I said before, ideally take the condition off early in pregnancy. Thin cows nearer to calving, you can have them on a ration to still gain condition. It's really important that they're going to have the strength to calve down. And if you've got good quality forage, give them the best quality forage you have available, and avoid overloading them with concentrates. If you find cows are losing excessive weight near to the end of pregnancy, nutritionally, could she be carrying twins? There's an increased energy requirement for twins near the end of pregnancy, and that can really drain them. Is there other feed issues such as feed access? Perhaps heifers are getting bullied, and there's not enough space. So think about the layout of the sheds and how that is. Could that be affecting the cows? And also, you know, be in touch with the vet if there's any other issues. And Tim will come on to that as well, on vet issues in relation to thin cows near calving. So the main driver, or the main influence you can have on the cow's condition nutritionally, is the base ration that the cows are on. So whether you're feeding hay, haylage, deferred grazing, forage crops, silage, all these are the base ration that goes into providing energy, protein and minerals for the cow. Now, apart from straw, it's quite a consistent feed material, although it needs high protein. The rest of those forages can all vary quite substantially, and you know, in dry matter as well. For example, forage crops are very wet, silage can be very wet and then to very dry, and the amount that you feed is going to affect the energy that goes into the animal. So getting that base ration, knowing the analysis of your feed, is absolutely vital to build on. If you don't know that, then you know, for adding other things later on can be quite tricky. It's just guesswork, really. So forages, the base of the ration. For quality, you want to check the dry matter, energy and proteins. You do that with an analysis, or you know, your best estimate if you can't do an analysis. And that quality of the forage will give you a guide on the quantity to be fed, and that also depends on the stage of pregnancy. So once you know the quality and the quantity fed, that then will let you know what supplements will be needed to be added on. So any supplementation to the forages has to be based on the quality of the forage that's being fed. Otherwise, we are really just guessing. And I think that'll go a long way to getting the condition of the cows right, if we can take the guesswork out of the quality and the quantity of the feed going in. Okay, so pregnancy requirements, energy. I just wanted to give you a guide as to the energy requirements for a pregnant cow. You can see 20 weeks before calving, she's roughly needing 80 megajoules of energy. That's the unit that we measure energy in. 8 weeks before 90, 2 weeks before just 113, and into lactation 135. So into lactation, it's nearly double it would be for a dry cow in far off pregnancy. What I wanted to highlight about these is that you can see that her energy requirements in late pregnancy are increased quite substantially. However, you have maybe got a 9-week or a 12-week calving period. We need to take into account cows that could be later on in the calving period. If you're able to split them off and feed the earlier ones more, the ones that are closer to calving, more energy. But sometimes we just, you know, we need to pitch it somewhere. So around about the 90 megajoules of energy is where we would normally pitch our pre-calving rations there 8 weeks before. To give you an idea of this, high quality silage will provide around about 110 megajoules of energy, poor quality silage around about 80, sometimes maybe not as much as that. Average hay 80 megajoules and straw 50 to 60 megajoules. Now straw needs protein to go along with it, but that's just the energy content from straw. In lactation, poor forages will need supplementing with concentrates, but it does depend on the quality of that forage. So, for example, average silage will need 1 to 2 kilos of concentrates, and poorer silages might need 3 to 4. So again, targeting what the cow needs supplemented with on the base ration is vitally important. So we talked there about energy. Crude protein is also, or overall protein in the ration is absolutely vital as well. And you can see from the silages that we had into our lab at SAC in 2020, first cut and second cut, there are a huge variation in the protein content. So the protein content at the bottom there is grams per kilogram dry matter. So an equivalent of these would be like 9%, 10%, 11% proteins. There's quite a big range there, and another reason to know what you have in your base ration, so then you can supplement it accordingly. So I'm just going to touch on additional protein for colostrum. When we need to think about additional protein. So my main advice would be is that we need to think about additional protein for colostrum when the base ration is inadequate and doesn't meet the requirements of the cow. So if, for example, you're on a silage ration with a lot of straw, or a straw-based ration that there's not enough protein being added to, if the base ration is inadequate and doesn't supply the metabolizable protein that that cow needs, that is when we need to think about adding additional protein. Work that was done at Edinburgh University showed that heifers and cows expecting twins the calves had higher levels of failure of passive transfer of immunity from colostrum than cows that were fit and just normal cows. So I think there could be an argument for increasing protein in heifer rations and cows expecting twins perhaps to improve the colostrum quality, and also for cows that are a bit leaner. And we also added in there the question then, well, what do we supplement with? Again, at Edinburgh University, trials showed with metabolic profiles of blood that nutritional needs of protein and energy were met with high quality silage alone. So over a 10.5 ME silage requirements were met at a month before calving. If protein and energy is lower in the base ration, I have heard a lot of people talk about adding soya. Now, soya is the best part of £500 a tonne at the moment. It's a really high price this year, and an unprecedented price. And we also have the argument on how long you would feed soya for. So, if you're looking at improving colostrum quality, you would need to feed it for a couple of weeks before calving. But then if you've got a 12-week calving period, when do you start and when do you stop? It gets rather costly. I also just wanted to touch on the amount of like the soya you would supply, because I've also heard people say that, I'm putting 100 grams or 200 grams of soya in. But to put this into context, if you had a 10.5 ME, 11% crude protein silage, 100 grams of soya would supply a similar amount of metabolizable protein as an extra kilo of silage. So I think whatever supplements you intend to put in, the base ration really needs to be taken into account and worked out if it is actually necessary and it is going to be of benefit. On poor silage and straw rations, there might be a place, but better quality forage could be added instead, or there are other sources of protein that could be used as well. So again, take advice and ensure that base ration is correct. So I'll just touch on this just now. We're going to be talking a bit more about colostrum getting into the calf in our meeting on the 4th of February. But I'll just touch on it here. Some of the key points. So thin cows, heifers and cows expecting twins are all at risk of having poorer quality colostrum, so ensure that their ration is well supplemented. Adequate protein and energy in the diet is needed for good colostrum quality and for volume. So no heavily restricting diets near calving time, no starving cows or really restricting them will only cause metabolic issues in the cow and also reduce colostrum quality, which thus is going to make the calf not perform as well or be more susceptible to disease. Poor nutrition of the dam also affects the calves' absorption of immunoglobulins from colostrum. This was Irish work which showed that if the dam has poor nutrition, then it actually affects the calves' ability to absorb these immunoglobulins from colostrum. As I said earlier, protein always must be met in full, and ensure vitamin and mineral requirements of the cow are also met. So just going to go on to minerals for calving and what to buy. It's a question that we were asked quite a lot, and a couple of years ago we undertook a Rural Innovation Support Service project which looked at different minerals for pre-calving on 6 farms, and we found that there was a huge range in what was sold as pre-calving minerals. A huge range in quality of what they supplied and of feed rates as well. So I just want to sort of touch on that. First of all, whether you buy powder, molasse buckets or bolusing, I think in-feed powder is always the best way to guarantee that every cow gets the mineral requirement that it needs. If the powder minerals are offered free access, you get some cows that will take too much and then some cows that maybe not take enough, so a bit of inconsistency there. Now, while this can be hidden a bit if the diet is well balanced, if you have quite extreme diets, so whether you're on a straw-based diet or draff or other sort of extreme forage types, then you can sometimes see issues where the cattle are not going to it or end up with problems. And the same goes for molasse buckets as well. A fantastic feed for convenience and for outdoors, but sometimes indoors some cattle will take too much and then others won't take enough. So I always think in-feed would, if you can, is the best form of supplementation. I've put bolus with question marks there as well. We've got to remember that boluses only supply trace elements, so they don't supply major minerals like magnesium, phosphorus and calcium. So if you're using a bolus, I think they are great if you have a known deficiency on your farm of selenium, copper, iodine, these type of trace elements. However, I think really needs to be used with caution and a discussion with a nutritionist and a vet as to when you're using them and the reasons why you're using them, because they are expensive, but also you could be overdoing certain elements as well, and risking too much copper and too much iodine in the ration. Key points to aim for minerals pre-calving. I think you want to aim for low calcium, so 14% or lower. High magnesium, I'll come on to that in a wee minute, and I've put 10 to 20%, but it depends on the feed rate and the base ration. And you also want a good level of selenium, good level of vitamin E and some iodine in there, but not too much. And think about the role that minerals play all year round, and they're not going to solve deeper problems. So, if you've got problems at calving time, bolusing with iodine, if it's not been a proven deficiency, may not help your problems at calving. So I wanted to also touch on magnesium. We did a feeding for fertility project last year, and we took blood samples of cows pre and post calving. These are some of the mineral results from 12 farms pre-calving, and you can see there only 2% of the cattle had a phosphorus that was lower than the normal range. Only 9.5% with copper. None of them had a selenium deficiency, but over 30% of them had low magnesium levels in their blood. And this is also consistent with work that was done at Edinburgh University, where they did a trial with 80 farms, and they found that just under 30% had low magnesium in their blood a month before calving. Now, magnesium is vital pre-calving. It helps the cow mobilise their calcium reserves and meet our demands for lactation. And it's also important to work with calcium for muscle contraction in the birthing process, so minimising slow calvings and routine cleansings. The recommended amount is between 20 and 25 grams of magnesium in the overall ration. And as a guide, probably just over half of this would come from a grass or silage-based ration and less with straw and hay. If you have silage that has high potassium levels, so 2 to 3% potassium, then current advice is to increase the level of magnesium in the diet, because potassium stops magnesium being so available. So you need to feed a higher amount of that magnesium to reach the animal's requirements. So 30 to 40 grams in the total diet. To give you a guide with this, 100 grams of a 10% magnesium mineral would give you 10 grams of magnesium, and again 150 grams of it would give you 15 grams of magnesium, just as a rough guide. If you find you do have problems and you have they're associated with low magnesium in the diet, you can add calcined magnesite, probably about 30 to 50 grams a head, but this has to be done under nutritional supervision and guidance. Also in this project, we looked at iodine pre-calving, and we have, out of the 12 farms, we found that there was no issue with iodine levels in the cows. Now, the reference range for plasma iodine is between 50 and 105 micrograms per litre, and clinical issues like problems with stillborn calves would be seen at below 50 micrograms per litre. Now, none of the farms that we sampled were anywhere near this. Many of them are in the optimum range, and many of them way over 150 micrograms per litre, which can see they were oversupplied in iodine, which hasn't been proven in cattle but has been proven in sheep to cause issues with lack of absorption of colostrum. Now, cattle, it hasn't been proven, they may have a higher tolerance to iodine, but I think also it's expensive and it's wasteful. So I think if you are bolusing, if you're feeding powdered minerals or buckets, or putting iodine on their backs, just please be making sure that you're not doing too much of it. The animals in red there were ones that were bolusing as well as feeding a mineral. Okay, just to finish off there, some top tips. I want you to think about cow condition all year round. Avoid very fat to very lean cows. The condition of the cow will affect calf survival and that of the next pregnancy. And the best way to tackle the cow condition is make sure your base ration is as good and as accurate as it can be. So know your forage quality by doing an analysis to guide on the quantity to feed and the supplements that are required. So seek advice on this. Minerals, I'd like to encourage you to know the facts about what the farm is likely to be deficient in. Don't assume, and you know, this can be done by forage analysis, looking at the other feeds going in, and you know, you could get blood samples done to give you a baseline to see where the herd is at. And also just encourage you to look at the whole picture, so rather than a quick fix. So think about the access to feed, think about the energy, protein and minerals that are going into the diet, and health, which Tim will come on to, and see where improvements can be made. Okay, thank you for listening, and I hope there's some questions at the end after Tim's talk.
Excellent, thank you very much, Karen. So just a 10 out of 10 for timekeeping there, that was ideal. The thing to point out there, the references at the end are, there's a few papers there and a few things that are worth having a look at for a wee bit more detail. You know, it's a wee bit of a whistle-stop tour tonight, so there's plenty of opportunity to have a look at that, and we'll share these slides at a later date as well. So now moving on to the more veterinary end of things, animal health end of things, I'd just like to introduce Tim Geraghty, who's one of our VIOs in Aberdeen, and yeah, pretty much over to you, Tim, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Brilliant, thanks, Robert. I just need to change my screen here, something happened. There we are. Is that, you guys can see everything?
That's fine, yep. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, magic. Okay, so hi, thanks everyone for coming on this evening to listen, and thanks to Karen for a fantastic talk. And yeah, hopefully there's something useful here in the next 15, 20 minutes or so as well. I really like the questions. I think often when we took this around the country, as Robert said at the start, certainly the bit I got most out of is when the conversation started afterwards and people asked questions and whatnot. So I'd really encourage everyone to use the chat box and give comment and questions. And I think often that's where the most valuable information comes from. And if I manage to just pique some interest and generate a few nice questions at the end from this talk, then I'll be very happy. Anyway, I'm sticking to the topic, setting up the herd for calving, and I'll try and focus on the health aspects as much as possible. So I have the same issue Karen had there we are. So it's the 26th of January, and most of us can probably head down to the yard now and see a scene something like this. Fair enough, cows may still be out and we've all got different systems, but something like this where we're looking at our pregnant cattle and the winter ration that Karen's just gone through in detail is in front of them, and that's obviously a really expensive part of our costs, a big part of our variable costs. So they're eating a lot of money, and we are looking to get a return on that investment essentially. That's our plan, isn't it? With the system, is that we need to get a return on that investment as the cows gobble up our pound notes. It's a brilliant time of year, a brilliant time in the season, I think, to take stock of how did the system go last year in terms of calves produced and fertility and the usual targets, and then to try and think ahead. Okay, what could I tweak this year to try and improve things and make things better? So I'm a big fan of trying to do that and creating time to do it. And this is a wonderful opportunity. You know, these pregnant cattle are settled, the breeding's done, the weaning's done for most of us, and here they are in front of us. So if we were to give these girls 2 targets, Karen had 3, I'll nip mine down to just 2, then it's probably this. For most commercial systems at least, and of course this is an oversimplification, but probably helpful too. They need to wean a big calf. That's target number 1. And when I say a big calf, what I mean is a rapidly growing calf. It doesn't need to be big when it comes out. We just want it to grow very quickly. So they need to wean a big calf and then get back in calf quickly. So those are our 2 targets for the girls. And if they do that well, and if our system allows them to do that well, then given half favourable market conditions, we should make something of a margin on our enterprise and make some profit at the end of it. So that's where we start from. Those are our targets, and whether we're thinking about health or the ration or the system or whatever, we should try and keep those things in mind, and I'll try to do that now for the talk. I'm going to start with cow condition, and obviously with a little bit of overlap then to what Karen was speaking to, and with no apology though, because it would just be impossible to give a health talk on a health and production talk on suckler cows in January and what are we looking at now without mentioning cow condition, because it's just so critically important. And we'll start looking at under-conditioned cows, as Karen said. We really want to avoid that, and I'd like to just drill into the consequences of having under-conditioned cows and why it's so important to avoid. I'm very grateful to friends and colleagues, Luke O'Grady and Emmett Kelly at UCD over in Dublin. They have an awfully interesting data set together now. They've been running a project for over 10 years on seasonal dairy systems. Now, in fairness, it is dairy, so we'll remember that right at the start and be transparent. But I still thought there's data here that's relevant to us. It's a nice big data set, 5,000 odd animals, small number of herds, but monitored over several years, so 5 years of information. And the seasonal dairy system is kind of similar to us. Their targets are get back in calf quickly and produce a lot of milk. So there's clearly overlap. The graph then that we're looking at, we've got cows going back in calf, so we're looking at fertility outcomes, and we're watching them get back in calf. And as you get back in calf, you drop down this axis here. So these are cows getting back in calf over the breeding season, and then this axis here along the bottom is telling us how long into the breeding season did they get back in calf. So what we can see at a quick glance is, did they get back in calve? How many of them got back in calve? And how quickly did they get back in calve? Which is really fundamental to our system, as we've just said. And so we start to see the effect of being under-conditioned. This is body condition at calving time, under-conditioned at calving, the subsequent effect on fertility this summer. And it's not a good effect, of course. So we're seeing them getting back in calve more slowly. So the line starts to drop more slowly. And there's 10 weeks of breeding, just for interest. 10 weeks of breeding, a lot less of them back in calve at all at that period versus the animal that calves down in good condition. So with under-conditioned cows, we're seeding, you know, a bad event further on, that we might end up with a poor scan next time. And even if they're back in calve, they might be 10, 12 days behind where they could have been had they been in better condition. We'll change the graph. Let's look. So the same data set, the same circumstances, but this is looking at condition loss post-calving. So animals that lose condition after calving excessively. Of course, most cows will, but this is excessive condition loss. And we see something similar, you know, maybe not as pronounced, but certainly slower to get back in calve. And therefore, and not surprisingly, if we look at body condition at breeding then, so in our systems, when the bulls go in, these thin animals really starting to struggle to get back in calve, as we see there. So it's much slower to get back in calve, and you know, wherever you pull the bulls out at, a significantly less proportion of them back in calve. So when it comes to our two big targets, body condition low body condition can have a huge impact in getting back in calve quickly. Which is why we make it such a big talking point at an evening like this. If we then zoom in, okay, well, why is she under conditioned, and what are the disease risks that Karen mentioned? Of course, we've looked at the ration, and getting our ration sorted for energy and protein is priority number one. But let's just think about, okay, well, what if I've got the ration right, and I've done my maths, and I know that the silage is of this quality, and I've mixed a proper ration, and I'm putting my money here in front of the animals. From the health point of view, what I'm worried about is that animal is spending your money and eating that ration, but not putting it on her back, not holding her condition where she's going to be able to give you a return. And the number one disease I would like to flag up, there's a few things that can do it, of course, but one I would like to bring right to the top of the list is Yonis. I'll bring it to the top for two reasons. One is that it's very, very common. We're seeing it a lot. We see it all year round within the veterinary labs. It's always a common diagnosis made, and that's true for both dairies and beef suckler systems. So it's very common, and it's also one that if we don't deal with it, if we're not on top of it, then it gets worse and worse and worse over time. So it's an infectious thing, and it spreads very effectively in most suckler systems, and so it causes more and more problems year on year on year. And what these bugs are doing down here in the red circle is they're thickening the gut wall. They're making the gut wall thicker and thicker. And so the animal is eating the same amount of money. She's ingesting all that money, but she's not putting it on her back. She can't get the money out of her intestinal tract and onto her back. And so it goes out the back in diarrhea that you'll be familiar with, sometimes bottle jaw, condition loss. So we should all know where we're at with Yonis and have some form of a plan in place with our vets and be dealing with Yonis, or be aware of where we're at. Hopefully some of us will be very low risk and know that we are low risk, but if we don't know or if we're not sure, then we should be investigating. The next health issue I would highlight when we're thinking about under-conditioned is definitely liver fluke. So kind of a similar thing, also a very different type of disease. They're picking it up off the pasture. They're coming into the house then with these adult fluke, unfortunately down in the liver. You know, first of all, it drills through the tissue of the liver, and then it lives in the bile ducts and irritates the bile ducts. And basically, whatever about the detail, it's doing the same thing. The animal's eating the money, but not putting that money onto her back and losing condition. So we've got the same problem, and the chances of that animal hitting our targets are reduced again. So very, very easy to test for. There's good and inexpensive tests available. very, very common. Again, it's moved with wet weather, it's moved across the country. I think we need to be very careful to consider ourselves, oh, we don't have a fluky type farm. That's a big gamble we're making without doing the test. I would encourage, if we're not sure, to get those tests done and check. And there's lots of other things. So, you know, I've just picked out 2 for points of conversation. I think they're both very common, but there are other things that can be affecting our cattle and stopping them getting into the condition that we need them to be in. And I guess what I would encourage, similar to Karen, is that if you're finding under conditioned cows and we're not sure why, then please get your vet out to examine them and think about it. And even if it's late in the day, to try and do things differently this year, we've got next year and next year and next year, and we want to improve the system. You'll see here I've got twins on my slide, and I'll leave it up to you guys to decide whether twins is a disease, which, you know, that should be up there next to Yonis and fluke and whatnot. Some of us like them, some of us don't. But certainly undetected twins, not knowing that she's got twins, and therefore underfeeding her, and Karen showed us the difference in energy requirement and protein requirement. Undetected and underfed twins is the same problem. We're going to not condition off her and struggle then to get her back in calf again later on. Good. What about the other extreme? You know, there's a happy middle that we want these cattle at, but the other extreme, fat cows, well, there's not too many diseases that cause cows to get fat. Diseases tend to cause cows to get thin, but having them over conditions, so when they've had too much energy, too much good ration, then we do start to increase other diseases, hard calvings, slow calvings, milk fever, subclinical milk fever and milk fever, and retained fetal membranes. So just zooming back in here to the data from Dublin, same slides, same graphs. So hopefully our eye is in. Just look at the effect that having a retain. So if you know, it's not every fat cow gets a retained placenta, of course, I wouldn't argue that. But if it does lead to an increased rate of retained placentas, then we're going to very likely see that in a poorer scan and a later calving next year, if she does go back in calf. If we're assisting at calvings and increasing our risk of uterine infections, look at this slide here, lots and lots of lines, but basically each line is just another more severe infection in the uterus, chronic uterine infection toward the breeding season, and you can see the impact that will have on our scanning at the end and on how quickly those cattle get back in calf. So that the risks around retains, the risk around assisted calvings and secondary infections are very real for our fertility. Good. Okay, so we're back here. We've talked about condition. We've talked about some disease process, the consequences of not hitting the sort of textbook targets on condition, and the disease process around them. And then the last one I want to focus on at this time of year, a major health risk to our system and our targets is obviously abortion. We're coming in, the labs talk about abortion season, which isn't a very pleasant thought, is it? But that's what we see. We'll see more and more of these coming in from now through the pre-calving and calving season. And clearly, in terms of our targets, our season's targets, it's a complete disaster. We will not be weaning any calf, and we're not likely to run around and get her back in calf. So we're not going to hit our targets with abortion. And abortion is unfortunately common. So this is data now from the calf loss project, the Livestock Health Scotland calf loss project that we ran in 2018-2019. About 2,000 cows here, just under, all Scottish suckler systems. And we're seeing in both years abortion rates, conceived calves lost because of abortion of between 3 and 3.5%. Which is very high. If we imagine, maybe we would set a target that we want 95, 96 of our pregnant cows to wean a calf, then if we're losing 3% abortion, we're really going to struggle to hit that. It's not all about that average though, because at individual farm level, we see this huge variation. It can vary year on year, and it can vary between different herds. And of course, our eye is drawn to some of these really, disaster stories, and it's just such a tough year if you have a problem like that. really soul destroying. But there's also, we should also pay attention to the herds here sitting at 5 and 6% year on year, 2 years running at that sort of rate, far too high given our targets. But then we should also draw our eye to these guys over here that are looking, this is consistent, that's 2 years running, nice low rates, 1% year on year, 0 in some years, less than 2% consistently. So clearly that's our target. We want to move our systems in that direction, but lots of us are going to have problems on average. Certainly that's our expectation, unfortunately, is that while we're trying to achieve this, more of us might be over in this part of the graph and struggling. So abortion is a failure. It's not the target. It's not what we're trying to do. But what I would like to put forward here is that really the only true failure is not learning, and not learning from it, not taking the opportunity to learn. So if we, I hope you don't, but if you do end up with cattle aborting this year, and you've got a fetus, a fresh fetus that's not damaged, and the placenta available to you, then have a thought in your head, well, this is an opportunity to learn something about my system. The only failure is not to learn, and here I can learn something that might improve my system. And to do that, we need to investigate. Your mandatory reporting, we should all be reporting abortions. That's only going to screen for brucella. It's not going to do a full investigation. We have to go beyond that to do a full investigation and really to learn. And if you've got those two things, the fetus and placenta, you've got this great opportunity to learn. How do we do it? Well, you can take the fetus and placenta to a regional surveillance centre if you're close to one, or have your own vet come out and take the samples. We provide these little kits now to practices, so they can come out and you take the samples from the fetus and the placenta and you send them off. And the cost of that is subsidised. So because of our surveillance system, the Scottish Government subsidises lab costs within surveillance. So we're looking at, for a single calf, a price of around £67. And if you're having a really bad time and you've got a batch of them, you've had a couple, then it's more cost effective to bring them all in. And the more material the laboratory gets, the more likely they are to reach a diagnosis. And if we split that out over, 100 cow herd, we might be looking at 60, 70 pence a cow to go and try and learn something from our system. What do we find when we do that? So you may have seen this before. Well, we see a lot of abortions in beef systems coming from the feed, poorly preserved forages, the bacteria that live in poorly preserved forage, or around dirty water troughs, or around bad quality straw, dirty straw is driving a lot. That's this big chunk over here. We see a big chunk that are just sporadic infections. Most often that's just one of these things, but at times, if you get a lot of them, we need to think about, is there something bothering the immune system? But it's this part of the pie down here we really worry about, that we want to know if we've got, that's the specific infectious causes, and there's a few names down the bottom. But what those guys are doing, they won't leave the herd, they won't go away, and almost certainly until we take active steps to deal with them. Now, it's a small piece of the pie, so that's good, but if we have them, we really do need to find that out and start dealing with it. And as we've said, if a cow slips her calf and you've got the material, that's your opportunity to look. What do we test for? This is important to remember. If we get the full set of material in, then we'll run a test for all of these different diseases here that you see on the slide. So there's a lot of different things we'll look for in the one set of samples. But we'll only find one of these maybe 40 to 50% of the time, and that's when you get a positive result back, oh, it aborted because of A, B, or C. But in a lot of the cases, half or even more than half will run all these tests, and it won't be any of those things. So maybe she got a hurt or a knock, or she spiked a fever and we don't know why, but it wasn't one of these guys. Now that we should be thinking of that as, that's good news. We're content, we've screened for these things and we've not found them. Well, that's a good outcome, and it's an expected outcome. But it's when we have one of these things that we really need to learn that to help our system to improve. I'll finish with this slide here. It's an extreme example, so please don't take it as representative, and I'm not portraying it to be so at all. But equally, it's a good example of how costly having an infection like that can be. So we're looking at Another of these herds that were in the calf loss project, we're looking at their performance over 2 years across a range of, from fertility, abortion, stillbirth, etc., and ultimately leading across to the far right weaned calves. Now, this herd did have a Campylobacter problem, which affects fertility and abortions. They had that diagnosed by submitting a fetus, and then they took steps with their vet, worked really, really hard to deal with it. And what we see is a huge increase in fertility, excuse me, over 2 years, and a huge drop. I mean, that is exceptionally a good outcome, but you see the impact we have on abortion the next year. And the overall result is a massive number of calves weaned, so from low 70s up to high 90s calves weaned. Now, ballpark figures in terms of net output for that size of herd, it has a huge financial impact. So nearly 20 grand, over 20 grand of increased net output. Split that out per cow, 185 pounds per cow. So we need to take these diseases really seriously. If they get in and they get the chance to multiply up, they can cause really severe trouble and severe financial impact. And we must learn about that if it's the case. Excuse me, sorry, I have a frog in my throat. Anyway, I'll finish here. I'm just over time. Apologies, Robert. My take-home messages: cow condition is a critical part of the system, and investigate those thin cows. Have a look at them and get your vet out and find out what's going wrong. Avoid abortion. We're going to deal with that more. How do we stop the risk of abortion? We're going to pick that up on Thursday. But if we do have it, and on average some of us will, then please take the time to investigate it if you've got the opportunity. Quick acknowledgements, mainly to the UCD herd team. That was very generous of them to share the data and allow us to look at it. I thought hopefully it was interesting to you guys too, but also to our livestock specialists at SRUC and my colleagues within vet services that helped me pull these slides together too. And I'll finish there.
Excellent, thank you very much, Tim. I'll let you get your voice back. That was an excellent presentation. Karen, in fact, I'll start with a statement rather than a question. It's a really valid point, which is somebody asking if we can share the slides prior to Thursday so that we can have maybe more discussion on Thursday. And I think that's really what we're trying to achieve anyway, is to have that ongoing discussion. So we'll certainly do everything we can to get you the slides before that, because certainly there were two very good presentations, but there's quite a lot in the slides as well. So we'll get them out to you as soon as possible, and encourage a few more questions down the line too. So hopefully that deals with that one. Karen, first question is really to you. It's maybe open to the rest, but if your cows are really fit and so they're looking like they're going to calve really fit, is it okay to keep them or to put them on a poor ration post calving with in a view to pare a bit more condition off them?
That's a good question. No, because all you're going to do is scupper their chances of ovulating and then getting back in calf, and also the quality of the milk that the calf is getting at that point. So I think that would have to be something that's gradually done after the cows are safely back in calf again. I don't know what your views are on it, Tim.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. Try and do it slowly and steady, and try not to negatively impact the breeding season. Yeah.
To me, it comes back to what you were saying, Tim, about money, where the money is, and actually that fit cow with a calf at foot has got an awful lot of money on her back. That we probably don't want to pare that off at that point. It can be utilised at a later date as well. So, yeah, good question. What about on the fluke front, Tim? When is the best time to be testing cows for fluke? And in at housing, do you test at housing time or post housing time? And the other question is, what about outwintered cows? How do we manage them if they're constantly picking fluke up?
Yeah, two good questions. So around about housing's not a bad time to test for fluke. It's quite a slow disease. When we do the test, we're looking for either eggs in the dung or some of the fluke enzymes in the dung. The fluke produce enzyme, we look for them in the dung. Both of those tests take quite some time to come through. So maybe 8 to 10 weeks after she's picked them up before we can find them. But they do tend to pick it up from through the autumn, through the back end of the year. So if we're seeing them, if they're picking up infection then if we're housing later, then we should pick it up then. I guess a key thing to think about is if you think they've been exposed to parasite through the back end and you get a negative test at housing, then don't forget to go back and test them again and just be sure, because there's that delay between picking up the infection and the test becoming positive. So if you get a negative test, housing's a good time to do it. If it's negative, come back and do them again in the early new year. This time of year would be a good idea. The second question, Robert, sorry, remind me, is?
The second question was the outwintered question.
Oh yeah,
was it not?
thank you. Aye, yeah, it'll depend on the year. That the fluke stop being as active as the temperature drops. So cold is quite good for stopping for stopping the numbers on the pasture. But again, it is a challenge, and we do see through the vet systems, we'll see acute fluke at times, even at this time of year. So we've clearly got high numbers of pasture on high numbers of fluke, sorry, on the pasture. So there's no hard and fast rule, so it is a challenge. But generally, cold weather is helpful. But keep doing your tests. Go back and test again if you're getting negative results and you think you're clear. Think about doing further monitoring further on around the year.
Yep. Cool. Good answer. This one is probably to Karen, and maybe bring Alwyn in this one too. Is there any suggestions? This farmer's had issues with slow calves, like dopey calves that aren't suckling. From a mineral perspective or a ration perspective, is there anything we can do there to give those calves, or prevent that happening, give those calves a boost and make sure they hit the ground running? So to Karen first, I think.
Okay, I think there's probably could be lots of aspects to this question, depending on the system. But of course, just making sure that the ration is appropriate and that the cows are maybe not taking a long time to calve. They're getting on with it, but there's maybe a calf size issue or an assistance issue here as well. So I think just going over the ration to make sure it's as good as it can be. Alwyn, do you want to comment on the vet side, because it's obviously there's many things that could cause dopey calves?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember there's quite a few things that can cause these dopey calves. So you've got to remember things like a hard calving or a difficult calving to begin with can make them like that. One thing we do, and perhaps is maybe overdiagnosed, but we do assume in a lot of cases are these slow calvings because because it's been a prolonged calving process. The calves are born without enough oxygen in their blood, and their blood is acidic, and so something we call acidosis, and that can manifest as calves taking a long time to get up. So they take more than 5 minutes to sit upright. They're not attempting to stand within 15 minutes, and they're not standing. So that's another possibility. The other things is like septicemia as well is possible cause of dopey calves. So there's a couple of different reasons for it. It's in terms of acidosis. Some at times, and if it's mild to moderate degree of acidosis, there is sometimes a response to giving bicarbonate, and I have to stress that this is a vet procedure, so you need to call your vet to do this, because the bicarbonate needs to be sterile and needs to be given intravenously, and sometimes there is a response to that. So that's one thing that can be done. So I would discuss this with your vet in advance, and yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that. I think.
And I think, that's a key point as well, and a real take-home message, I suppose, is your vet really does want to discuss these things to prevent them happening rather than to deal with them once they've happened. So there's no, it's well worth raising those particular questions with your practice vet, and see if you can come to some kind of reasonable conclusion for them. Final question, Karen, actually is basically we're pushing hard, making better silage. I think there's a lot of farms producing better silage, but we're also now struggling to get straw. So it's getting harder and harder to balance these rations. Is there any advice for looking forward to next year's calf crop? How do we balance that ration for, dealing with particularly fit cows and a quality silage?
That's the hardest scenario. It really is, yeah. And I think when you've got good quality silage, you really have to dilute it with something, because if you're feeding it on its own, they're not going to have enough of a dry matter intake, for welfare-wise to satisfy their need to eat. It's a really difficult one. I suppose if there's any alternatives, feeding wise, keeping cows out longer if you can. That is the hardest one, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know if I've actually got an answer for fit cows and really good quality silage, apart from diluting the ration, or keeping calves on a bit longer, perhaps to
That's
for
just what I
more
was
milk.
going to say. I think we'll probably cover that a lot more in the final session in August, when we're looking at when to wean, and actually that fit cow, good silage and calf at foot might actually be quite a good combination. Might be, if your system allows it, you maybe can grow some calf off the back of that cow. So
it's maybe more of an argument for just sort of planning silage making, so that there is silage for the cows, if you're going to have that sort of issue. So whether it's EFA silage or poorer quality areas that can be fed, either along with it or I know it's a really tricky one.
It actually wasn't the last question. There's one wee question, and we'll cover it again. There's quite a few colostrum questions coming up, but just we'll deal with them in next Thursday. But this one I think we need to deal with, Alan, is does putting a spoonful of bicarbonate of soda into colostrum help?
No. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. No, not really. It's not advisable to give bicarb by mouth, because well, we don't think it's difficult to regulate to begin with, but also by giving bicarbonate, we worry that you're disrupting the bacterial flora in the abomasum, in the fourth stomach, and you want that kind of flora in order to clot the colostrum when it gets in there. So it's more important really to look after that. So I worry that by giving bicarbonate by mouth, you are going to do more damage than good, really. And there is a question over how well it'll be absorbed as well, and probably it'll be absorbed too slowly. That's why the sooner you can get bicarbonates, intravenously, the more successful you're going to be with this treatment. So yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend it orally.
Yeah, and much more on colostrum to follow. I just wanted to nip that one just when it was there. So basically that takes us neatly to, it's actually just after 9. So I hope today's been useful, and as I say, it is a starter for 10, so it's 1/7 of the way through calf crop. And if you are able to attend, it would be really good to be involved or have you involved in our meeting on Thursday night, where Alan and I will be focusing on systems or on broader systems, and probably furthering a lot of the questions that have come up today as well. So the rest of the panel will be here for questions. As I say, thank you very much to the speakers tonight, and also to UIF for funding today, and hope to see as many of you as possible on Thursday. So with that, I just wish you all a good evening, and thank you for coming. All the best.